Okay, so my name is Fernando Rodriguez. I'm gonna be talking today about the difference between physical time and kind of experiential time or temporality, right? Before I start, I want to mention two things. One is that if at the end of the talk you think that this is very obvious and probably is not, like, how is that this thing is a life talk, is because probably you understood it very well, because it's quite very simple, very intuitive. I just don't know why I didn't see it before. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that you know that sometimes we humans tend to think that we know much more than we actually know. I have this impression that this is the case today with the consciousness stuff. And this is why we have a lot of theories like in the IIT, where we kind of say, okay, if we know everything about the brain, or we know everything a lot about something, why is that we cannot still, the thing that is missing must be something that is kind of magical, or kind of, it has a very different nature. So one of the things that I'm going to present is, or the thing that I'm presenting is one of these cases, right? One of the things that can be missing, and probably there are many of them missing. Okay. So to start, yeah, this is kind of the basics, right? On the one hand, we have like the physical, material time. And on the other hand, we have our experience of time, right? And while this is, of course, quite intuitive, and probably nobody's going to discuss anymore, like with the time passes sometimes slower or faster or whatever, we seem not to be able to understand totally still how is that we cognitively, let's say, produce this time, right? This temporality. So we know that all the cognitive systems that we know are physical. I mean, they are material. But our experience of the temporal dimension of our experience is not something which you can say there is material in that sense. Yeah. So the main claim that we're doing is in the paper is that we have come to believe intuitively, probably, that this is how we see things in real life, right? So you have one frame, then a second frame, and a series of frames, and then we put them together, and then we have some kind of notion of how time advances, right, or how the passage of time. But like, unlike the movies, to which we are an external observer, in the case of the cognitive systems, the frames would be the states of the system, right? So you don't have like an external observer to put together the frames. And you know, this is quite interesting, but I think this, I already mentioned the IT. I really liked some parts of the IT, especially the part of the intrinsic information, but I just want to mention it again in this case, because I think it's the probably most kind of the best example of how we have come to this idea that for every sensory sampling, we have some kind of, or for every state of the system, we have some kind of experience, right? It's always like the idea of this instantaneous thing that is kind of put together in some kind of strange way, you know, even if, and this is kind of important, like in every framework that I've been kind of studying, especially in activism, but also predictive processing, there are many kind of accounts for temporality. So you have normativity in activism, you have counterfactuality or temporal thickness. We also have the notion of temporal experience in psychology, but when it comes to how we try to formalize it, we always kind of let it aside, right? And we say, yeah, it must be something that comes like after. So basically, we're always kind of conflating this kind of temporal reality, external temporal reality, to what it's supposed to be the case of in our, like this, right? Probably I was thinking Spanish when I did this. So let's say these states, and these are the phenomenological states, right? So we have this idea of one-to-one, some kind of mapping, right? Okay. So we know, as I was mentioning before, we know that the cognitive systems the cognitive systems are material, right? So the samplings, let's say, I'm just using kind of, I don't want to go into discussions of how computation and stuff like that, but the sensory samplings are normally, I mean, they must be material also, right? So every time we kind of, let's say in this case, do a saccade, because this is the idea that we have in our minds, right? So we take like many different samplings, a sequence of samplings, and then we put together something like this, right? But the thing that we normally tend to forget is that a series of samplings is made like in a sequence of time, right? And the environment is not going to be waiting for you to do your samplings, right? So when you start taking the first ones, things kind of started moving. And if you try to put together that actually into one frame like this, you know, in one image, that image would be super incoherent. So what we are the core of our hypothesis is that actually sensory samplings are incomplete, and they are not enough to produce one experience. You know, so basically in this case, let's say that this is what is being sampled, right? It's kind of some kind of sparse sampling of the environment, right? And the only way in which something like this could be coherent is actually something that it needs to be temporal, because otherwise you couldn't make a sense out of this, right? So the core of our hypothesis, I mean the core of our theory or framework, is that the minimal perceptual unit is actually temporal in nature because of this. So it wouldn't be the case so much that time is a component, let's say, of or time appears at some given point in evolution of experience, but that experience is inherently temporal because of this. Because perceptually speaking, there wouldn't be any other way for us to do to put together things, you know? If you think so, and this is what I like a lot, Merleau-Ponty's kind of writings, temporal distinctions wouldn't be something that we make because we put together things, but they would appear from the distinctions that we're able to make from our phenomenological perception, right? So basically, when you look at something, let's say I'm looking at you, I can distinguish kind of you in the things that I can see colors and stuff. I can categorize stuff. So basically, the same thing would happen with time. Let's say if you have a minimal perceptual unit that is temporal, it has a temporal dimension or aspect, then the distinctions like past, future, present, conditionality, counterfactuality, whatever, would be done within that kind of unit, you know, not by adding them or operating with them. Yeah, I like that. It's kind of fun. Yeah, so basically what we're saying is that at least there would need to be like these three things. The physical time, right? Whatever that is. I don't know even if physicists are able to know, to say what the physical time is. Cognitive first order sensory motor time, which is, in our view, is kind of the very basic sensory motor dynamics that you need for a system to be able to survive, right? But in this case would be all the activity, the sensory motor behavior activity would be basically just reflexes. And I really like the example of the sunflower, because I always kind of wonder if that's the case. And then there would be something like this, right? Some kind of integration of different sensory stimuli to create some kind of coherent, unified unit of perception. This is, I think I'm good with tempo. More formally, this is, you can read it actually in the paper. It's super simple. So even if you don't really like math, you're going to understand it anyway. But the interesting thing, I believe, from this is this concept. Because basically what we were saying in the paper, and we weren't totally sure at that time, is that, we were more like of speculating, is that there must be some kind of memory in the system. And memory in that sense sounds kind of fairly computational to someone who is comes from an active background like me. So it was kind of difficult to kind of accept it, if you want to put it. But I'm gonna come back to this later. Okay, so why I think that the thing that I'm presenting is kind of interesting is because of this. I've always been interested in, or let's say that there are many that want to believe in the idea of life-mind continuity, but there is actually not really any formal justification or proof for it, right? And there's this kind of infamous gap between cognition and experience. And I think that these kind of things kind of start like breaching the gap very slowly, probably in 1,000 years, but eventually, right? Yeah, and this is basically what we have been doing since we submitted this in March. Now we are almost at the end of July, and we have been working in looking for evidence about the things that we kind of conceptualized in this paper, right? And it has been much better than I was actually thinking at first. And basically we have all the evidence that all the things that we wrote in the paper, we have now evidence, like from human psychological, neuropsychological experiments. And we've been kind of very interested in this, in insects, in ants, because there's always this question, kind of, are in which kind of evolutionary stage, or when can we say that there's some kind of phenomenological continuity? And we think that maybe working with ants could be a good idea, because there's good mappings of their brains. We kind of understand more or less how the brain works. And the thing is that we have found all the biological evidence for our paper, so we're kind of very happy about that. And now we need to come back to the conceptual part and try to understand what would be the actual mechanism that would be performing the integration, But yeah, so thank you very much.